like Bill said, we always knew that we had predators around the farm, but it wasn't until a couple years ago when we had a blizzard in 2009. At that time, we had a lot of pen damage. We had a lot of rips in our nets and stuff like that, and we had strays running around the farm. I mean, it went from thousands down to hundreds, but even at that point, we still had birds running around for months. And it wasn't until the following spring that once we started moving young birds back out into the pens, also one day we came across one of the pens, and there were 200 dead birds in the pen. So we went in, looked for holes, found a couple small holes up in the net, nothing real serious. Next day we come back and there's 200 dead birds in the pen again. So obviously we knew we had a problem. And none of us had any experience trapping on the farm, so we weren't real sure what to do. And we did have a list of a couple people that had stopped by our farm years past and gave us their name and number if they would ever be able to come and trap on our farm. So we went through that list, came across Jeff's number, called him. Jeff came in and I showed him what we had been seeing with the dead birds and where we thought the critter was getting inside. And Jeff right away looked and said, "It's a fox." Well, I was pretty skeptical that a fox was climbing a post, going down the division fence, chewing a hole in the net, going in the pen, killing some birds, and then leaving that night. But next day, we had some more dead. Well, Jeff set a couple traps that night, and the first night he set traps, we actually had a couple guys from the farm sitting around waiting with guns just to try to get the critter as well. And that first night, Jeff caught a fox in the trap. So we were all real happy. We thought, okay, great, we got the critter. And a couple days later, a little bit further down, there was 100 dead birds in the pen. Okay, so now what? Again, I sat there with a gun that night, and actually 2 o'clock in the morning, something was flushing birds in the pen. I stalked the pen about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I ended up shooting the fox inside the pen. And had I not seen it, I wouldn't have believed it. But that thing was going around the pen, just killing a bird about every 2 minutes. It was just killing a bird and just leaving it lay. So obviously we knew we had a problem that we had to take care of, and that's where Jeff came in. What we did is we set up a bounty list for Jeff, and Jeff started trapping critters, and I started to get real interested in what he was doing because, again, seeing all the things that he was catching, I got intrigued. And so I watched him, and with trapping, I've learned that it's a real steep learning curve. It's a long learning curve. Watching him really helped me. I went on the internet, read some books and stuff like that, so I've kind of helped myself a little bit. But when it comes to fox and coyotes, Jeff's the expert. So he's now on my speed dial. If I have ever any problems, I just contact Jeff. Every state is different when it comes to regulations, so if you do trap or if you do have a trapper come on your farm, I recommend you know your state's rules and regulations. Every country is different. And make sure that the trapper that you do have is following those rules and regulations because they are representing your farm. In regards to expertise, I'm going to switch it over to Jeff. So.
Just an introduction about myself. I was born in James, Wisconsin, grew up around Wausau, northern part of the state. Lived in several states from Texas to South Dakota. Background in farming, manufacturing, engineering. I think predators are fascinating. Started trapping as a hobby in high school. Predators of interest that we're going to talk about: weasel family, skunk, mink, weasel, raccoon, possum, and then the canines, of course, my favorite ones. A little bit about trapping preparation. For trapping canines in that, you have to degrease your traps. When you buy a trap new, there's a lot of manufacturing oils on it, and people have handled it. It's gone through a lot of different processes, so they're dirty, basically, even though they look shiny and new. You have to deodorize them. Deodorizing is to degrease them, and that, actually I'll step back. Degreasing them, you actually boil them in a lye solution, and that will remove all the grease and everything off of them and all the foreign odors. To deodorize them, you let them actually take on set them out for 3 to 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and take on a good coating of rust. Then you boil them in a logwood dye solution, or you can use walnuts, hulls, different things like that. That it's a wood that has a high tonic acid in it, because what it's going to do is blacken your traps up. Blackens them, and then it deodorizes them of all foreign odors. Then at that point, they're clean and they're ready to go. You seal them up with wax. The wax seals them. The only thing you got to remember about wax, though, at that point, once you've waxed them, is that it's also an absorbent. It'll take on other foreign odors, gasoline, tobacco, different things that they might be associated with. So once they're sealed, hang them in an airy shed outside someplace where they're out of the weather but yet aired out. Scent control on the line. I use cotton gloves for setting traps. Never touch the traps with your hands once they've been sealed up with wax and that. You don't want to get any of your odor or foreign odors on the trap. Trap storage and transfer. I use cotton gloves, contaminated ones and clean. Contaminated ones are ones that I would use for putting out lure and stuff. Don't want to use the same gloves for handling traps that you use for lures. You got to keep them separate. Trap storage and transportation, put them in a box with dirt in it. When I transport them from the shed to the field and that, put them in a box with dirt in it, cover them with a good clean tarp. Keep the odors away from, keep your lures away from the traps. You can see on the table I got a box over here. It's an old ammunition box. That box has got a seal on it. All my lures are inside that box. You can be in this room right now and not smell it, but if I open that lid on that box, you could probably smell that odor into the back of the room even. Keep the foreign odors away from of your traps. More trapping preparation. All the tools you use on the trap line. Trowel, hole, basket for transporting them from your vehicle out into the field, sifter, stakes, chain. All's got to be clean. Pan covers. Pan covers are really critical as far as being clean. I boil all my pan covers if I use them. Usually I use a poly under the pan. It's cover now, but basically what the pan cover's function is to keep dirt from going underneath the pan, because if dirt gets under there, the animal steps on it, it won't spring the trap, and I've had that happen. All items must be clean and odor-free. Trap setting cloth or kneeling pad, critical not to put your knee down on the ground, wear rubber boots, personal disciplines, no spitting on the line, kneeling by the sets, tobacco use, urinating, rubber boots or hip boots. Leather boots will absorb odor, and the animals will pick that up if you're out there and setting for them. A little bit about the animals. Raccoons. Related to their family, female average is 11 pounds, 17 to 18 pounds of the males. Much larger males exist, much larger ones. I've seen much larger ones, I've caught much larger ones. Mate in the wintertime, 63 days later, the average of 4 young are born. Spend much time on land, but equally at home in the water. Wide variety of foods, mice, fish, crayfish, eggs, chickens, pheasants. They're omnivores, they'll eat just about anything. They have problems with raccoons in cities eating garbage, so. This one was caught at the River Road Farm last year. These were caught this spring. Had a little bit of an issue down at the Noss Road Farm. Brian found dead birds in the pen. Types of sets that I use, dirt hole sets. We use box traps. Some custom sets. One that comes to mind right away, Brian had come up with the idea they're crawling up the posts on the pens. So we actually set a trap on top of one of the posts, took 2 or 3 raccoons climbing up and getting into the pen where they rip into the netting and get in. Bucket set, and by the way, the post set, I told Brian there was no chance he'd ever catch something in that, but proved me wrong. Dog proof. Dog proof is turning out to be very quickly one of the most popular ways for taking raccoons. It's a little tube. Raccoons are notorious for sticking their hands into holes. You can leave this thing lay on the ground. Most of the guys I know, they bury it. It actually looks like a mouse hole. They put a marshmallow down in there, no lure, nothing else. A raccoon will go down there and try and get that marshmallow and gets caught. Bucket sets, usually associated with a conibear. That's a killer type trap. Put the bait in the back of the bucket, sticks his head through the conibear, dispatches them right away. Trap sizes and types. 1.5 coil springs, large enough. It's plenty big enough for any raccoon. 160 conibear for like the bucket sets and that. They can stick their head through very readily and get caught. For the box traps, I use a number 1079 or 1085. The 1085, the only difference between the 2 traps is 1085 is a quick set trap. Basically, you just pull the handle, it's ready. And real easy to set. This is an example of a dirt hole set. My trap pen is actually located right here. You can see the dirt hole right up in here. There's a lot of detail that goes into a set like this, but I guess the biggest reason why this slide is in here is to show how blended it is. Probably no one would walk by this and even know that there's a trap set there. It's very blended and very natural. That's one was box trapped this spring. Possums. Possums, I catch a lot of them. They're kind of an incidental catch. I got a slide in there, yeah. And here's the things that I think about the possum are, I don't think the possum is a huge predator on the farms, except for eggs, if he gets into a pen. I don't think he digs a lot to get into them. He goes through entrances where other animals, namely skunks, have dug into the pens to get in and that. But he's more of a scavenger than a predator. I think he'd kill if he had the opportunity, if it presented itself, but he's not as aggressive as the other predators. Easy to catch. You catch them by accident all the time. Mink. Mink is definitely a serious predator to not take for granted. They're small in size, you know, average. There's the average size in that. Females are smaller, finer haired. Males are the larger ones, brown to black in color. You can tell them by their prints. A muskrat gnat will have a print on the ground, and you'll see his claw marks in that. But a mink will always have it's kind of a fuzzy looking print because they have hairy feet. They breed in late January through February. Young are born 47 days later, 4 to 10 young and later. 100% carnivorous. That's all they eat is flesh. They don't eat berries or anything else. This mink was caught just in December here. Brian had suspected that there was one getting into a pen, kind of looked around to see where it might be getting in at. Set a conibear in there. The nice thing, this was a blind set. The mink walked right through that conibear and never knew what hit him. He was dispatched right away. Weasels. We have not caught any weasels on the farm to my knowledge. You haven't caught any, have you, Brian? I haven't seen a lot of sign of weasels around, but I do know they are around. They're more aquatic than, I say they're more aquatic, and as are the mink. But mink will travel, a male mink will travel 15 miles in one night. And you know, they may not make a circuit for 5 days, so you may not even catch them for 5 days. But they travel mainly along the riverways and that, but they will venture out and get away from the rivers and that. River Road Farm is close. The home farm is actually within a mile of the river. Noss Road is only a couple miles from the river, so they could be any place on the ones around here. Just more weasels. Weasels are easier. I think the best way to probably catch weasels that I have seen is they make a weasel box. You can buy them. The only thing with the weasel box is they usually sell it with like a large rat trap. And they're smart enough to get in through that hole in the box and set that trap off and get out with your bait. They're very sharp that way and can get in and out. They say to put a coil spring in there that'll actually snap on the side, come from the sides, and that's the best way to get them. Skunks. Took 20 of them this year on the farms. They're all over the place. A little bit about them, they stink. They're a smelly predator. When you catch them in a leg hold, you get dispatched and definitely be upwind of them so that the odor sprays away from you. They're a silent predator. What I mean by that is what we found is that the skunks will actually dig in and dig under, and they'll live in a pen. They'll go in there, they'll dig a burrow in there, and I didn't realize that until this year. Actually, one of the workers on the farm was chasing me down. I was out checking traps, and he says, I have dead birds in that pen right there. He said, I can show you exactly where they're coming in and everything. Well, actually, what was going on, he took me over and he showed me, and this was the only trap I've ever set inside of a pen. There was an empty pen. There was an empty pen next to the pen where the birds were dead, and he was coming underneath. He'd dig underneath the doors every night. And The guy who stopped me said, well, do you know what it is? I said, yeah, it's a skunk. It's a big skunk. I can see his, his track in that. And I said, so I set a trap in there, and I had him the first night, and he was a big skunk. But what they do is they get into a pen, and they kill 1 or 2 birds a day. They don't kill a bunch of them. They're not a bunch of dead birds in the pen. Well, then 30 days later, there's 60 dead birds in the pen, and you wonder where they came from. Well, that guy's in there living in there, and he's only killing enough to eat every day, and they'll go back to the same dead bird and eat it again, the next day. So, but they kill 1 or 2 birds a day, and you really don't realize it until all of a sudden you got a bunch of dead birds in the pen. Another thing they do, skunks are notorious for digging. They dig the accesses into the pen. They go up and they dig, and for some reason they aren't afraid to dig in there and get in underneath the net, and they're egg eaters. Mate in February, March, young are born in May, 4 to 7 young average litter. Some more skunks. Traps, 1.5 coil, 160 conibear. I use a blind set, dirt hole sets, and a hay set, and I'll show you some of those examples. We'll talk about red fox. It's a fox here, this picture here, this was taken at the River Road Farm. Caught him in November. There's 45 subspecies of fox, and the only reason why I put that in there was to indicate for us, as far as predators are concerned, there's 2 types of fox. There will be 45 subspecies, but there's 2. One is educated and one is not educated. The educated one is one that's had his toes pinched, and he will be a nightmare for you. He's very, very difficult to catch and get rid of. He'll dig your traps up all the time. I don't have any pictures that I included here, but I've had traps that have been dug up. I know we got diggers on the farm, and they'll dig the trap up, leave it lay there, and it's not set off. They'll do that every night. I've reset traps 2 or 3 nights in a row, and so you got to catch that type of fox in a different type of set. Average litter is 4 to 6. Litters of 13 have occurred after mating in February, March. 49 to 58 days later, kits are born. Some vixens may reach sexual maturity in 9 to 10 months, which means the females that are born this spring, by next January, will be ready to have litters. In captivity, they live 14 years. Average in the wild is 1.5 years. Catch box, dinner box. This picture here was actually taken. Brian set a trap at each end of a catch box because he knew that there was something hitting this particular catch box every night. And he actually doubled on this. There was a fox on each end when he went the next day to check it. Equipment, a lot of this I mentioned in the earlier part, so I don't think there's anything additional there. Canvas gloves. All the preparation that I had mentioned earlier, I thought, you got to boil the traps, degrease the traps, wax the traps, keep them odor free. Brian bought this trap off the shelf of one of the local stores, did not degrease it, did not deodorize it, did not wax it, and caught this fox, I think 2 nights after he set the trap. And if I wouldn't have saw it, I'd never believed it, but that fox has got both front feet in that trap. That's how bad he wanted to get in there. What he did was actually planted a mouse, and the distance from a fox's nose to his front feet when he's checking something out is about 6 inches. And all that I could figure is that Brian had this trap pan exactly 6 inches from that mouse, and the fox could smell it, or 6 inches from the mouse, and the fox could smell it, so it pounced. And his nose went to the mouse, and his 2 front feet hit the pan of the trap, and he caught the fox. I don't think that's common, but it's an interesting slide. This guy here was a young one that was caught this last spring, new pens, and you can kind of see underneath the gate here, and the larger stones in that. He moved all them stones out. They were moving them stones out and getting into the pens and killing birds. I think its mother was actually training him to where to hunt and find food. That's what happened. So this one didn't. He had a hard life lesson to learn very young. Coyotes. Coyotes are very, very smart. They're they've the one predator that has pretty much thrived regardless of how many of them get caught or get hunted in that. This one was caught on a home farm in November. Breed in February, younger born in April, only the alpha male and female mate. In our region of the country, the young may live with the parents for up to 2 years. Coyotes have adapted in this part of the country, usually in most parts where the coyotes are pretty prominent, out west and stuff where there's plenty of food, the mated pair do not allow the young to stay with them. They drive them out, which they got to go and start their own territory, which gets them spread out all over. Our part of the country, they can live with parents for up to 2 years, and the only reason biologists think this happens is because 4 coyotes can drag down larger prey like deer, and that easier than 1 or 2 coyotes can. Young are driven off in the fall as a rule into different territories, which makes a transition of many transient animals moving through the area. That's why you can catch, in the last 2 years on the home farm, I've taken 7 coyotes along the back side of the pens, inside of the buildings. They're very clever, exceptional sense of smell. They say their sense of smell is about 400 times greater than ours. So it takes very little lure and stuff to get them, and I'll give you an example of that. Very good memory. Enemies of the fox, they will drive them out or kill them. This is a hay set that I had down at the Noss Road farm this year. Set down there. Took 2 skunks out of this set and actually put the skunks in the hay, buried them underneath the hay, and this was the result of that. I had him, it took about a week and a half before I caught him. So, it's this was a dirt hole set. It rained a lot down at the Noss Road farm, another coyote that we'd taken. This one was just taken a couple days ago. That set there, this is the exact same set. It's taken a few days ago. Traps that I use, a minimum of a 1 3/4. You have to inspect this trap after every catch unless it's modified. If it's modified, meaning being reinforced in that. If you have questions about that, I'd love to answer them for you. I'll be around. You can ask me those questions. I would recommend these particular traps. This MB450 and the 550, I think those are the premier coyote traps. They're made by MB's Minnesota brand. They're sold out of Pennock, Minnesota. They have cast jaws on them. They got a custom base plate, which will take the abuse of a coyote, and crush-proof dogs. So if they're biting at it and that, they can't bend the dogs. There's not a lot of repair on the trap. You can basically reset that trap and it's ready to go again. MB650, I only have a half dozen of these that I use. They're huge. In my perspective, I use them for winter trapping only because the ground will freeze the trap to the ground sometimes. These have 4-coil springs on them. That extra power on the springs will break them loose so that they don't freeze down as much. One final predator. I don't know a lot about what can be done about these. Brian might be able to touch more on that. But this predator, he's very good at catching pheasants. He's a couple pheasant kills that I've seen that hawks have actually killed. I took these 2 pictures. There were actually 5 hawks around these when I drove up and saw what they had done. So, but they're a major player. There's a lot of them around the farm. Some of the resources that I have examples of these books and that up here on a table. You're welcome to look at them. I'll leave them out for a while, and you can write down anything on them or the videos in that. There's a lot of resources out there. If you got coyotes, this guy here is he's a professional trapper. He's made 2 videos, just studied coyotes a lot, and just a great resource to learn how to trap them in that. Publications, I got the Trapper's Post. This is all about trapping. There's a place called Trapper's College. Trap online, you go there for a week. They'll teach you how to trap. But be sure to know your local and state federal laws on trapping concerning animal damage control. Most places, I think they allow you to rid yourself or to reduce the population if it's causing a major problem.